It's Friday, May 16th, 2025. Welcome to Make It Make Sense. I'm Grant Herms. Since the inauguration, I have been thinking a lot about what's been happening to the Department of Justice. The big headlines are the two men, Kash Patel and Don Bongino, who run the FBI, but also Attorney General Pam Bondi and the saga of Matt Gaetz that played out before her that I talked about on the show over the summer and into the fall. But there's also been this other thing that's been happening behind the scenes. And it's been happening in a lot of departments, but the DOJ will be one of those places that it's felt most acutely across the country. A whole-scale decimation of the staff that works there, whether they've been fired or whether they've chosen to resign, or, like what just happened this week, they've been reassigned to jobs they either haven't done in the past or to not do the jobs that they were doing in the first place. And it's how I came across this week's guest, Stacey Young. She founded and started a brand new group called the Justice Connection. Stacey was a DOJ lawyer for 18 years in its civil division and then left in January. And she started this group as an outlet for former and soon-to-be former Department of Justice employees and lawyers, and to help them to know what happens next and to help them through whatever happens next. And we have a really great conversation where I ask her about what it means to watch the DOJ be dismantled in this way, what she thinks will happen. Are we less safe with the Department of Justice in the hands of people like Pam Bondi, Kash Patel, and Donald Trump this time around? And before we get going, as always, rate and review the show on whatever podcast app you're listening to this on. Make sure you're subscribed on that app and on YouTube so you don't miss out on any new episodes during the week. And subscribe to the Make It Make Sense Substack so you get all those new articles that are coming all of the time. Okay, with that out of the way, here's our conversation with Stacey Young. I want to know about your career a little bit. You were with the DOJ for 18 years. Mostly in the civil division, and we can talk about, and I think we should talk about the different divisions that are a part of the DOJ because that matters here. But how did you come to the DOJ, and then how did you come to leave?
Sure. Well, I came to DOJ 18 years ago because I wanted real litigation experience. I had come from nonprofits where I was doing a little bit of litigation, but I really wanted to do some serious litigation where I was leading cases and doing my own thing and working on really important issues representing the United States. I mean, so many lawyers come to DOJ because it's an incredible honor to stand up in court and say, I represent the United States. And I wanted that experience too. I didn't necessarily think I would stay for 18 years, but I did. And I worked in the civil division for 13 of those years and the civil rights division for the last 5.
So why stay? I mean, 18 years is a long time. That's a full career for a lot of people. So What was it that made you stay?
Well, I'm not that old, Grant. It's not a full career.
I didn't mean it that way.
I stayed because I loved the work. You know, when you're a lawyer and you want to litigate, I think DOJ is the best place to do it. It's not going to make you rich, but you are going to have interesting cases and you are going to lead those cases. And you are going to be representing the most important client in the country. It's an incredible honor. Judges take DOJ lawyers very seriously, or at least they did until a couple of months ago. And it was, I can't imagine having a more engaging, gratifying, challenging litigation career anywhere but DOJ.
Mm-hmm. And talk to me about the difference in the divisions here, because I think when people think about the DOJ, they don't realize how big it actually is. Because you've got the criminal division, and we think about that one a lot. People talk about that side of this a lot. But the civil division, is that the bigger side of this compared to the criminal division?
Massive department. There are actually 40 components. And within those components, there are many offices. So it's vast, and 81% of the department actually comprises law enforcement agencies, the FBI and BOP and DEA and ATF and U.S. Marshals Service. And then you have U.S. attorneys' offices. and they're in 93 districts all over the country. And then you have main justice, which includes 5 litigating components. And those are, and I'm going to try, I think I can remember all of these: the civil division, the criminal division, the national security division, antitrust, tax, civil rights division. Actually, that's 6. I think I hit them all. And each of those litigating components work on different issues. Most of their names explain basically what they do. So it's a massive institution. It enforces laws in every imaginable facet of American lives. And one of the criticisms I guess I have of DOJ over the years is that it didn't do a good enough job of making the public understand what it does and how important it is in all of our lives. It doesn't just keep us safe and keep our nation secure. Those are 2 of the most important things it does, but it's there to protect the climate. It's there to protect our civil rights. It's there to make sure that consumer rights are protected, that monopolies don't go unchecked, that people don't commit tax fraud, that, we are monitoring and preventing terrorism threats. I mean, there's so many things the department does, and we've been taking it for granted too long. And at some point in the future, hopefully, if the department recovers from these brutal attacks, I hope it'll focus on getting the word out better about the critically important work it does.
Yeah, that leads me to the thing that I was going to ask next here, which is, what has it been like for you to watch the DOJ come under attack like this, for parts of the DOJ, parts that you worked in specifically, to be gutted in the way that they've been? And we'll talk about those in the specifics coming up here. But what has it been like for you to watch this happen overall in the last, I don't know, what has it been, 115 days?
It's been absolutely devastating to watch. It's completely unprecedented. I've never seen anything like this. Nobody who worked at DOJ before I did had seen anything like this. It is really just, in so many ways, a wholesale weaponization of what the institution is. And it's a departure from what it's always represented. We've seen institutional norms just abandoned left and right. And this is going to have hugely harmful effects on the American public. And in terms of the employees themselves, they have been absolutely under attack. The word I keep hearing is the mood there is just funereal. And after the election, there were members of the administration who said out loud that their intention was to put federal employees in trauma, to demonize them. These are things they actually said. And I took them seriously. And they have followed through with those promises. And that's why I started this organization, to support DOJ employees who stay and those who have recently left.
Yeah, the guy who said that was Russell Vaught, I think. He now runs OPM, so basically the
OMB,
HR for the federal.
that's right.
Or OMB, I'm sorry, yeah, not OPM. You said that the mood inside is like a funeral. What else are you hearing from people who are still in the DOJ right now? Are they trying to find a way out? Is there some pocket of them who are resilient in a sense, that they still believe in upholding this thing, or is it just despair across the board?
I mean, I think you could say universally everybody wants the department to survive. And I think the vast majority of people on January 20th wanted to stay. Their plan was to stay. Their plan was to continue filling their important jobs. They did not want to be pushed out by this or any administration. They knew that their work was critically important and they wanted it to continue, and they knew how to do their work because people generally stay at DOJ for a very long time. And they wanted to continue working there. There are people in some parts of the department who have come to accept, and this has been a difficult process for everybody, come to accept the fact that their office, their component, is simply not going to be doing meaningful work anymore. The administration has been very clear that certain certain offices are do not advance their priorities, and they're essentially gutting them or shutting them down. So I think a lot of employees in those particular offices, those components, have accepted that and have left or are trying to leave. There are other people who will try to stay no matter what, no matter where they are. There are no good answers. There are no bad answers. Whether people leave or stay, these are very personal decisions. And everybody I've talked to has been considering these decisions, making these decisions with integrity and, frankly, despair.
What's it like for you to have those conversations with those people? As somebody who's now working to help DOJ employees, whether they're in or leaving, but what has it been like for you to have those conversations?
It's devastating. I've never heard my former colleagues sound like this. And they're not necessarily coming to us for advice, because these are deeply personal decisions they have to make. They know what's at stake. There's some people who need to stay in their jobs because they need the health care. They have families, and they in the job market right now, in part because of the attacks on the federal government, is terrible. And not everybody has the luxury of simply leaving their jobs because they find their work morally reprehensible, or because they're undergoing terrible attacks. It's very difficult to hear that people talk about what they're experiencing, what they're feeling right now. It really is trauma. Russell Vogt was very serious when he said he wanted to traumatize federal employees. And I think people at DOJ are feeling it especially acutely.
For you, I mean, you just mentioned that some of these divisions have been at least told that they're not going to be doing any meaningful work. I know that there was just a restructuring of some of the DOJ divisions, that they're going to be focusing a lot more on immigration enforcement. In what you're seeing and hearing, which divisions are being hit the hardest right now, and what's at risk for losing those things?
The division that's been hit the hardest over the last couple of weeks is the Civil Rights Division. It was essentially dismantled, and the division is almost 70 years old. It is the most important civil rights office in the country. It was established so that this country could try to move on past the days of unchecked discrimination and segregation. It's done incredible work to move our country forward. And without the lawyers and the other professionals who fuel that work, we're going to see a lot more unchecked discrimination. Companies, schools, prisons, other entities are going to know that there's no meaningful civil rights division left. And without the accountability that the Civil Rights Division has provided for almost 70 years, we're going to see a lot more discrimination in our country. And that's devastating. Other components that have been hit particularly hard are the Environmental and Natural Resources Division. Climate change, protecting the environment are obviously not priorities of this administration, and they have communicated that in part by trying to gut that division. The Tax Division has experienced attacks recently. We're going to see a lot more unchecked tax fraud as a result. The FBI is being weaponized by the administration right now. We're now learning that a large percentage of FBI agents are going to be working on immigration matters, potentially full time. Certainly DOJ does immigration work, but the majority of immigration enforcement happens in DHS. And to repurpose FBI agents to focus on this, to the exclusion of focusing on terrorism and going after fraud and public corruption. I mean, that is the holes, the gaps this move is leaving, is really going to leave us in a terrible position.
Are we less safe after those moves?
I don't see how anybody could think we're not less safe. Taking FBI agents out of their normal roles is just an amazing unforced error. The FBI does so much to keep our communities safe and our nation secure. And to that point, they're also removing some of the top leaders with just irreplaceable institutional knowledge in the National Security Division. How has national security become a partisan issue? Don't we all believe that we shouldn't have another 9/11? I think probably the reason we haven't had another 9/11 is because of law enforcement officials at DOJ. We are leaving ourselves far more vulnerable to terrorist attacks and violent crime without the professionals focusing on these issues in the FBI, at ATF, and also in the criminal division, which has also been attacked. So, it's hard to go through a list of all of the offices that are being gutted or repurposed because there are so many and it's hard to keep up. But, and we tried to help folks by creating a list of everything that's happened in the first 100 days. We put that out at the 100-day mark. And when you really go through that list, it's stunning. It's absolutely stunning.
It's daunting, right? It's daunting to look at that and think that these things have happened so quickly. And some of them we've moved past so fast. I mean, I find myself in the news cycle itself feeling like a thing that happened 3 days ago might now be old news, even if it is still incredibly important. And so I imagine when you're putting that list together, it's frustrating. It's devastating, which is a word I guess we're just going to keep using here. I want to come back to some of the divisions because some of the numbers that you had sent me before we talked are, to me, staggering. But a thing that you just touched on is a thing that a lot of the guests that I've had on the show have said before, which is the institutional knowledge being drained from our departments. What do we lose at DOJ specifically by not having those people around anymore?
It's really hard to quantify.
Yeah.
I mean, if you think about an FBI agent, they are just exquisitely trained. They are just the finest law enforcement officers in the country. It takes so much time and money to train each agent, and it can take decades to make them into the experts they become. And then when you fire tons of them or drive them out in other ways, coerce them to leave, you are losing so much. It's hard to fathom. And you're losing this talent because of grudges, because of retribution, or because, of just political priorities that are taking the place of important public safety and national security goals we've held for decades that are critical to keeping our country safe.
Yeah. So some of the things that you had mentioned earlier about specifically the civil division that had been completely gutted. So these are the numbers that you guys had sent me before we talked. In January of this year, there were 360 DOJ employees in the civil enforcement division. Now it's 110. And in January, and this is the stuff that really got me, was that in the education civil rights division, is this right?
Mm-hmm. These numbers are all for the civil rights division.
So it was the education civil rights division was 45 employees in January. It's now 5. In the employment rights division, it was 35, and now it's 5. In the voting rights, it was 30, and now it's 3. And this is the one that got me because I had just done an interview about 2 weeks ago about the same thing. In the federal compliance division, it went from 20 in January to 0 now. Can you walk me through what each of these things does? And like, I mean, I have to imagine that federal compliance and education on top of the voting rights and employment, but education in particular is going to be felt by a lot of people across the country, only having 5 DOJ lawyers working that now.
Yeah, it's going to be devastating. And education civil rights laws are enforced by the Civil Rights Division and the Education Department. And the offices in both of those departments have been essentially gutted.
So what does that mean for our kids and for our schools and for the quality of what life is like for students, staff, teachers? What does that mean?
Which means we're going to see a whole lot more discrimination in schools. And we know that there are communities of kids who have a tough time in school. And there are remedies for violations of these laws that are important and encourage schools to comply in advance, and provide redress if violations happen. And when you remove the enforcers of these laws, there are no checks anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you're especially going to, kids experience very serious racism in school. There are kids who wouldn't have access to school because they have disabilities without civil rights laws. There are going to be, LGBTQ kids who are going to experience far more bullying and harassment. And federal laws are not going to be enforced in a way that helps prevent that and provides remedies when it happens. It's again, let's use this
Talk to me
word.
about the
It is
employment part of this.
devastating.
Is that like equal opportunity employment enforcement? What are we talking about in that side of the division?
Yeah. So employment discrimination in this country is illegal under Title VII of the 1964 Civil Rights Act and other laws as well. That law is enforced by different offices, including the EEOC and the Civil Rights Division. The Civil Rights Division enforces laws generally that are applicable to state and city governments. So when state and municipal governments violate Title VII and other laws, the Civil Rights Division investigates and oftentimes litigates. And we know that there have been terrible civil rights violations in state and local governments. And because of the numbers you mentioned earlier, you're going to have hardly anybody in that office making sure that city and state governments do not engage in employment discrimination. That is, and there are a huge number of millions of Americans who work for city and state government. So the effects of this, again, going back to the word, are devastating.
Yeah. I mean, I think the voting rights section is sort of self-explanatory a little bit. I've also, in my course of my reporting over the last decade or so, I've done a lot of work in the voting rights space and how these things play out. And to only have a tenth of the people at DOJ protecting voting rights when it is almost definitely going to continue to be under assault in the next 3-4 years post that, I can't imagine a more important time we would need somebody and more people in that division. I mean, like, I think even given the original numbers that were, in the mid 40s to from 20 to 45, that also feels like a low number to me in those divisions.
Yeah. Let me just correct you on something.
Yeah.
You said there's going to be only a small number of people left to enforce, to protect voting rights.
Yeah.
That's actually not what they're going to be doing.
Hmm.
So the Civil Rights Division issued a new memo that created new mission statements for every section within the Civil Rights Division. And it basically just diverts enforcement away from what the Civil Rights Division has always done to basically the president's priorities. So instead of protecting access to the polls and making sure that votes matter, which is what the voting section of the Civil Rights Division is supposed to do, now that division is supposed to focus on voting fraud, which really is just a politically expedient fiction, and certainly serves this particular president's interests. So even though there are a few people left in the voting section, they're not going to be doing the work. They're going to be doing the president's bidding.
Right. I was just being too optimistic about what was left. Right.
Yes, I do try to keep all optimism in check.
Yeah. I think the federal compliance, that's corporate compliance with federal law. No one is doing that work, even if they had been, right? Am I right about saying what that is and understanding what federal compliance is?
Yeah, they do a whole lot of work. One of the major statutes they enforce is Title VI of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, which makes sure that entities that receive federal grants don't violate civil rights laws. And federal grants, until recently, were a sizable part of the federal budget. And it was a way to make sure that American entities were not discriminating illegally. So that work is obviously not going to be done because there's nobody left to do it.
We've hit on a couple times in what we've been talking about so far about the shift from the DOJ being a non-political department to it being pretty purely political in its new mission. What do you make of Kash Patel, the FBI director, and Deputy Director Dan Bongino, who, for all intents and purposes, the Deputy Director is kind of the COO of the FBI. And so what do you make of those two guys having been purely political choices for these jobs?
Yeah. I think I'm correct in saying it's unprecedented to have both a director and a deputy director who had never worked in the FBI.
I think that's right, yeah.
And not only had Kash Patel not worked in the FBI, but he had spent years castigating it, and the people who work there. So what I keep hearing is that it feels like there's a real leadership void. What we're hearing is that Director Patel does not attend daily morning meetings like directors have for decades. We are hearing that upper leadership is conducting lie detector tests on FBI employees to see whether they have leaked to the media. FBI employees have been threatened with criminal investigations for leaking. So there's a real culture of fear there right now. And there's a sense that the people running the show don't have the requisite experience, don't have the respect that they should for the Bureau, and are not guiding it in the direction it should be taking.
Sure. What do you make of the Attorney General then, Pam Bondi, who also was a similar choice? Yes, had been a lawyer, right? Had been the Attorney General for Florida, but also seems to be operating in a way that is devoid of that kind of integrity you'd expect of the Attorney General. So what do you make of her in this role of overseeing the DOJ?
She seems to believe that she is the president's lawyer and that DOJ is the president's law firm. And that is not how it works. DOJ is there to enforce federal laws and the U.S. Constitution. It is not there to represent the president. When I used to go into court, I represented my client, which was the United States. It's not the president. If the rule of law is going to be maintained, DOJ has to maintain independence. It cannot be an arm of the White House, or else we are just not a nation of laws. We are a nation that simply abides by whatever the president does and whatever political whims he has.
I think the idea of breaking the rule of law has been something that's been talked about so much in the run-up to Trump being elected and then post-inauguration day. It feels almost too big, I think, for a lot of people to wrap their heads around. As you're watching these changes at DOJ, how worried are you about a sort of collapse of the rule of law?
Oh, I'm terrified. I mean, for a long time, I think the concept was inchoate and kind of, as you said, difficult for Americans to really grasp. But we're seeing it unravel right now, and I think people are starting to realize what it really means. When you see an administration not following court orders, when you see a president refer to himself as the chief law enforcement officer, when you see absolutely no divide between DOJ and the White House, which has been such an important institutional norm, especially since Watergate, when you see all of this collapse, you really get a sense of what the rule of law is. And I think we've all taken it for granted. We just assume, well, it's there. Like, it's just part of our fabric. Of course, there's a rule of law. Of course, court orders are going to be followed. Of course, precedent matters. Of course, laws matter. Of course, the Constitution matters. They only matter if our government enforces them and follows them. And we're seeing right now that that's not happening. And I think what the opposite of the rule of law really is chaos.
I mean, he stood in front of a room full of governors, what was it, a month and a half ago, and said, "We are the law. I am the law," as the president. It was chilling to watch, frankly, because that's not how this is operated. Do you think that this erosion of the approach to the rule of law, or the actual erosion of the rule of law, is that going to have a lasting effect on the DOJ that we won't be able to fix? Because there will be a time after Donald Trump. There will be a time after this presidency. So did we break the DOJ so bad that we can't put it back together again right now?
I hope not. I hope we can recover from this. I can't see into the future, but DOJ has been powerful, just a powerful institution for so long, and its policies, its practices, its norms were so well established. People aren't going to forget them. I hope we can get back to a place where we can reconstruct it, and perhaps make sure that those traditions, those norms, are more codified, are more durable, so that somebody can't come in and within 115 days tear so much of it down. I think we have a lot of work to do, both to rebuild and to make sure that it can withstand attacks better than it has.
So what's next then? Or I guess rather the better question is, what needs to happen in the interim right now? Obviously the work you're doing, and we should talk about that because we really haven't talked about what Justice Connection is doing. But what do we do in the meantime?
I think we need to get the word out about what's happening and why it matters. Like I said earlier, and perhaps DOJ is somewhat to blame for this, but DOJ's work is just not understood well enough by the American public. I think, and this is something Justice Connection is doing, we need to make sure that Americans understand what DOJ does, why it's there, why it keeps us safe, why it keeps the nation secure, why it protects our rights and freedoms. If people don't understand why it's so important, they're not going to push back on its destruction. There's a knowledge gap there, and we are trying to fill it. And I think that's one of the most important things we're doing. And I think that needs to be a concerted effort among anybody who cares about the rule of law.
Yeah. So talking about the work you are doing, so you're doing that work of sort of better informing people about what DOJ does and why it matters that we're attacking it. But also you've got this component for employees as well. So let's talk about that.
Yeah. So, as I said earlier, I knew that DOJ employees were going to be under attack. And I knew that, addressing these attacks with class action lawsuits and other things I was hearing about in kind of the civil society world, among nonprofits before the inauguration, I knew that those things were important. But I also knew that DOJ employees were going to need direct support. And it seemed obvious to me that the people best positioned to provide that support were going to be people who used to work there, because they understand the department more than anyone else. They care about its demise more than anyone else. And DOJ employees trust them because it's all the same community. And I knew that DOJ employees, they're not, they're generally an apolitical bunch. They take the apolitical nature of the civil service very seriously. And I knew that many of them wouldn't go to an organization on the outside that was known as being progressive or known as being right-wing. I knew that they would go to an organization that they viewed as apolitical, like the institution, and that, there were people there who they could trust, which I think are alumni. So we are providing DOJ employees with a range of services. Right now, we have been working hard on building a legal support network, which we'll be announcing soon. which will involve DOJ alumni attorneys providing pro bono representation to DOJ employees, whether they get fired and need representation in their challenge to terminations, or whether they find themselves as the subjects of criminal or congressional investigations. These are terrible things to have to endure after a career of public service. And I don't think that DOJ employees should have to be navigating these things on their own or having to pay the exorbitant amount of money it takes to hire a lawyer. So we're doing that. We're also providing DOJ employees with connections to mental health providers who have agreed to treat DOJ employees. And we have a list of providers that we're providing on request. We are also working on offering free packages of security services to DOJ employees who face threats of being harassed or doxxed online or worse. And that is a project we are moving along quickly. We're also working on building an employment support network to help DOJ employees who have been fired or resigned and need to find new jobs. And we're providing other things like media trainings to people who leave DOJ and want to speak out. We're offering free media trainings now and connections to free financial planning sessions and executive coaching sessions. So, we're really providing a wide range of support to DOJ employees. And we're really kind of also serving as a sounding board for them when they just kind of need advice or guidance about how to deal with many of the challenges they're facing.
Are you concerned about your safety, about retribution, retaliation, targeting from the federal government for helping these employees?
Yep. Which is, yeah, I am. I've been, targeted online. It's, I'll use the word again, it's devastating that people now have to worry about their safety if they speak out.
What do you think is the future for those folks? Do they leave and go back? Are they committed, most of them, to the public service aspect of what they've been doing? Or in the end of all of this, do we lose so many people who just aren't going to go back because of what they have and what many of them will be experiencing?
Oh, I think people will be all over the map when it comes to that. I mean, these are people who are largely very committed to public service. That's why we're seeing a lot of them trying to get jobs with state and local governments. And we're actually partnering with a group called Civic Match that is connecting federal employees with state and local jobs. I think many will absolutely want to come back if the department recovers. There are people who are not going to want to go back because they won't want to find themselves in the same situation in a couple of years. It's really hard. It's really hard to predict what's going to happen. But federal government and DOJ has always been viewed by people as an important and safe career choice. The civil service is designed in a way to incentivize people joining federal agencies and staying there for their careers. You're not going to get rich doing it, but you are going to have job. Until recently, you were basically promised job safety. You were promised a pension if you stayed for a long time. There were civil service protections that this administration is currently running roughshod over, but it's a place where you could go do important work, develop expertise in a subject matter area over many years, and feel good that you spent your life serving the public. And there are going to be people who are just not going to be willing to risk undergoing this trauma again.
The last question, Stacey, is how can people help now? How can they help these employees from the DOJ? How can they help federal employees in general, but how can they help the work you're doing?
The way, we encourage all DOJ alumni to join our alumni network. And you can reach out to us at info@thejusticeconnection.org. And we will, if you're a DOJ alum, we will add you to our network, and we will offer you direct opportunities to volunteer to help your former colleagues. Everybody can help civil servants in so many different ways right now. They can, babysit for them when they're forced to go back to their offices or forced to go back during certain hours and can't pick up or drop off their kids. They can bring them meals. They can let them know that their public service matters. And everybody who is in the position to do so can also donate to organizations that are supporting DOJ and employees across the federal government. Justice Connection can only do our work because people have recognized that it matters. People have donated, and we encourage people who also recognize that supporting DOJ employees matter, that supporting the rule of law matters, can donate to us. And you can do that by going on our website, which is thejusticeconnection.org. And we are very grateful for the support we've received and the support we hopefully will continue receiving.
Well, Stacey, thank you so much for doing this today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. This is great.
I want to thank Stacey for coming on the show again. I think it was a really great conversation. If you want to know more about the work that the Justice Connection is doing right now, you can visit their website. There are links in the show notes and description of this episode. Otherwise, that is it today for Make It Make Sense. Please rate and review the podcast on whatever podcast app you're listening to this on. Like, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications on YouTube so you don't miss out on any new videos. Subscribe to the Make It Make Sense Substack, where I'll have a different article with some of the things that I left on the cutting room floor up with Stacey over the weekend here. And as always, share the show on social media. It's MIMS News Pod. That's MIMS News Pod, all one word on every platform. I am at Grant Herms on X and Blue Sky, and at Grant Herms TV on everything else. Thank you so much for listening today. I'm Grant Herms, and I'll talk to you next week.